Good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Eskens. I'm an author in Minnesota, America. I'm here talking to two of my favorite, two wonderful authors, Michael Connelly, Ian Rankin. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Uh, I guess we're running a little bit late because we had some technical difficulties, but we're on and running now. So I'm going to get right to the questions, and I'm going to let the people who are watching know that you can post questions. I'll try and catch them as we go, and so you can have your questions asked of these two wonderful authors as we go, or at the end. So I'm going to start with Michael. Uh, can you talk about your experience as a crime beat reporter and how that impacted you as a novelist?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the impact's immeasurable, actually. But it was part of a kind of a secret plan. Um, when I was in college, I decided I wanted to be a writer of crime fiction, and so my dad suggested that I get a journalism degree and work for newspapers as a crime reporter, and it would be like research, and I'd get into police stations and crime scenes and things like that, and I don't even know how he had the wherewithal to suggest that, but it was a pretty good idea and it worked out. And so I was a journalist for 14 years, and 12 of them were covering crime in various parts of the United States. And it ended up being like 12 years of research. It just kind of gave me a base knowledge of how things work, but also, more importantly, is the character of detectives. Not all detectives are cut from the same cloth, and I was gravitating towards the ones who are kind of mission oriented, and they became my friends and sources and helped me with my books long after I left the profession of journalism. I think there's still some journalism in my books to try to get things right about the bureaucracy and politics as well as procedure. And so yeah, I'm still living off of those 12 years on the cop beat, even though it's been going on 30 years since that ended. Um, I still draw on that experience.
Ian, at the start of Midnight in Blue, we find Inspector Rebus imprisoned in Edinburgh prison, or sorry, Sutton prison. How did you go about researching that environment for that story?
Um, well, as an author, I'd been invited into prisons many times down the years, including in the USA. So I'd seen the prison system from the inside, but in a very limited way. But I did need a bit of a refresher course. Luckily, I've got friends on the outside who were prison officers at some point in their lives, and I was able to get access to the governor of the prison in Edinburgh, who luckily for me, I think, was on the cusp of retiring. So he said, yeah, sure, come in, have a look around. And he was much more open to answering my questions and giving me little tidbits and juicy anecdotes than I think might otherwise have been the case. He wasn't as guarded as I expected him to be. And so that gave me a sense of the kind of structure of the place that I would be writing about. And a lot of the little details I got just from a single day spent in the prison made it into the book. I then went back a few weeks ago because the librarian had asked me to go back and talk to the prisoners about writing and literacy, which I did. I thought you better get in quick, Ian, and go talk to them now, because once the book is published and they've had a chance to read it, neither the prison guards nor the inmates might be quite so happy to see you again.
Quick follow-up. When you wrote about the governor in your book, will the retiring governor that you met see himself in that character?
Well, I sent him a copy of the book several weeks ago and he's not got back to me. So make of that what you will. Hopefully, no. I mean, well, I don't know. The governor in the book is a good guy. Will he see himself in that? Maybe he will. There were certain things he said to me, like I don't like to say, prisoner or inmate. I call them clients and stuff like that. And I did try and get that into the book. He was a very progressive governor in many ways, as progressive as you can be in that environment. But no, I'm still waiting for the only feedback that really matters.
Okay. Michael, you talked briefly about having contacts with police officers and experts. Can you talk about the breadth of your specialist forensics and detectives that you have that you rely upon when you write your books, and how did you build this, and how could someone who's not a crime reporter go about building this kind of a network?
Well, that last part of that question, I don't know because I haven't had that experience. I mean, but I think the commonality, and Ian probably gets this too when he talks to cops, is that they respond to sincerity, and so I've always said, look, I want to get this right. I'm not, I don't want to exaggerate, or I don't want to undercut, what you do for your world. So I think the sincerity is really the calling card. And it's funny because when I was a reporter and I had this press pass that allowed me to go into police stations, I was still an adversary. Especially when I was in LA, the LA Times and LAPD as institutions just can't stand each other, hate each other, and it's funny because they're right across the street from each other, the physical headquarters of both places, and so I found that when I quit being a journalist and I was quote unquote writing fiction, even though I wanted the fiction to be as real as possible, um, more doors opened up for me, and that was where the sincerity came through. And when you say how can someone else build this kind of network, and network is also an exaggeration. I have like a cadre of three really close friends who have worked probably combined 100 years in solving murders in Los Angeles. And I just go to them and say, I need to know someone in DNA, or I need to know someone who can talk to me about bullets and tracing bullets. And they find for me who I have. So my network may appear big, but it's really small. And it's because of my relations go with these people who none of them I knew when I was a reporter. I've come to meet them as a novel writer. But I don't even call them sources. Like they're my friends because I've been dealing with them for decades. But and I kind of, I hate using the word, procured them as helpers for me through my sincerity and just saying I want to get this right.
And a follow up, real quick: how has the advancement of technology in the investigative field made it more difficult or easier to write a crime novel? And this is for both of you. Let's start with Michael. Like, when you started, DNA was not a big deal. Cell phones, people didn't carry around cell phones. You couldn't track them through cell towers. How has that made it more difficult or more easily? How has that affected your writing?
Well, I think it's made it interesting to me as a researcher. Not that I spend tons of time on researching, but, to me, it's just an opportunity. Yeah, things change, technology changes. Both Ian and I have a really long span of writing our books as our guys age and adapt or don't adapt to stuff. I think Harry Bosch has always been kind of a reluctant adapter, but he does adapt. He knows how, he's a mission oriented guy, and he knows this stuff can help solve crimes. And so to me, it's all that technology, forensics, all that's all window dressing, but it's important. But it's these are character stories, and you're writing with a character through a story, and how they use or don't use technology is really, to me, less important than who they are and the empathic connection you're trying to create with your reader.
How about for you,
Yeah,
Ian?
I mean, I think everything has changed, and in some ways it makes our job easier, and in some ways it makes it more difficult. You somehow got to get rid of the cell phone. If someone's being kidnapped and they've got a cell phone on them, it's quite easy for them to let people know where they are, which is why in so many movies and TV shows you get this no signal or low battery in the cell phone. It has to be got rid of. And the first thing the police do, for example, in a missing persons case or any crime in the UK, certainly, they would check the CCTV. They would check car number plates, see who was in the area. They would check people's doorbells They would look at the information on how people were using their cell phone, try and triangulate that to where they've been moving around. I mean, that's all really interesting and really real, but it's not what the meat of my books is. The meat and drink to me are the human relationships. So I give a sense that all that stuff is happening. All these interviews are going on. People are being doorstepped and their cell phones are being checked and their doorbells are being checked and everything else. But we're going to concentrate on human interaction and just give a sense that all this other stuff, this tech stuff, is happening elsewhere. And setting a book in a prison, of course, gave me certain problems. For example, there's a lot of cameras, there's a lot of surveillance. So how do you commit murder in a prison and get away with it? And that was one of the problems that was one of the challenges I gave myself in this book, was how can you commit a murder in prison in a locked cell?
Well, and that's actually
And
my next. That was going to be my next question to you. This is a locked room mystery in a prison with all the security. Talk about the difficulty of writing this particular book in that setting.
Well, the first problem was that when I spoke to the governor and laid out the story for him, Rebus has committed murder, he's found guilty, he's in the Edinburgh prison. He said, "Let me stop you there." He wouldn't come here. He said, "We wouldn't put an Edinburgh cop in an Edinburgh prison. That would be very dangerous for him. We'd take him somewhere else in Scotland." And I went, "Well, I don't want him to be somewhere else in Scotland. I want him to be right here." So that he's within touch and distance of his ex-colleagues. So he said, "Okay, well, if he was here, he'd be in the special wing, which is set aside for offenders who cannot mix with the general prison population for whatever reason." I thought, okay, that's good, but I do want him to be in the general prison population. So then I had to find a way to do that. Then I had to find a way to get past all the CCTV and the guards so that the locked room mystery, the locked cell mystery could happen. So those were great challenges because I'd not had those challenges before, and I think it keeps me on my toes. It stops me getting jaded. It stops me getting too facile in my relationship with Rebus. And that's one of the things I love about Michael's books, by the way, is the fact that he doesn't allow his main characters to sit still. They're aging, they're moving on, their lives are changing. That's all reflected the way policing operates, the way the public thinks of the police. I mean, that's a problem that both Michael and I have, talking about police detectives as their main characters, is that somewhere along the line, both sides of the Atlantic, the public start to fall out of love with cops. They don't trust them. They're not the good guys. They're not the cowboys in white suits anymore. So we've got to take that on board as well, that these people we're writing about may not be the most trusted people in the community anymore. So all of that presents challenges, but those challenges, I think, keep me on my toes and keep the series fresh.
Michael, question for you. Writing from a female point of view can be a challenge for a male. How do you approach that challenge? And as being the father of a young woman, does that affect how you've written your characters?
Well, my daughter has definitely inspired some of my characters. Most of my main characters seem to have daughters the same age as my own, so it's probably because it's easier to research that way. But I just like writing about people who are good at what they do and are smart about getting around barricades, whether they're political, bureaucratic, or villainous. And I worry about gender second to that. And most of the time when I've written about female leads, or I have a female person who helps me with that, or back reads. The Renee Ballard books are all single inspiration books. There's one detective who's among that small cadre I told you about, who she's based on. So the woman, until she retired a few months ago, ran the cold case unit at LAPD. 6 or 7 years ago, kind of told me about her life and how she, as a woman, had made advances in the LAPD, how she played that game, and that inspired the character of Ballard. So ever since, every time I write Ballard, I send chapters, I send questions, I send texts, all kinds of stuff to. Her name is Missy Roberts. I send her messages all the time about what would you do here, what would you say here. Then she reads my manuscripts and says, I wouldn't do this, kind of like the governor with Ian. Like that would never happen. But I say, I have to have it happen. How do I get there? And she's very smart in helping me get to the spot where I want to be.
Ian, you published your first Rebus book in 1987, and he's basically aged over real time. My understanding is for a while there you plan to retire him at the age of 60, but you brought him back. What keeps you bringing back? What keeps you going back to Rebus as a character?
I don't know. He won't leave me alone. I tried to kill him off at the end of book one, and he just refused to die. Then 17 books later, he hit 60, which is a mandatory retirement age for detectives in Scotland. So I thought, I'm done with you. That's it. And then I got an idea a few years later for a cold case novel, and there was a cold case unit in Edinburgh that was staffed by retired detectives. I thought, well, I can invent a new one, or I've got one in my back pocket. So out came Rebus again. And the challenge from then on was just how can I get this old age pensioner? How can I inveigle him into a criminal investigation? He has no ID. He's not really got not many friends in the force. There was a time when everybody in Edinburgh knew him, but they don't anymore. So he walks into a police station now. He thinks he can just walk up the stairs to the CID unit. He gets stopped at the front desk and they go, "Who are you, Grandad? You're not getting in here." He tries to cross the line, the cordon, a murder case, and he, the locus, and they go, "Wait a minute, you can't come in here." So those are challenges, and I like that. I mean, I've enjoyed watching him age. He actually, I mean, sneakily, let's not tell anybody this, but he's probably more like 80 than 70 these days. He was 40 when I introduced him, for God's sake. So yeah, lots of challenges, but I've enjoyed it so far. But I always think the next book could be the last book. The previous book, Heart Full of Headstones, was intended to be the final book, and it ended up with him at the Reichenbach Falls. He's on trial for murder, sentenced about to be pronounced the end. I thought, what a great end to the series. But then fans disagreed. And I got thinking, what would happen? Well, he'd be found guilty. If he's found guilty, he goes to jail. If he goes to jail, he's surrounded by people who hate his guts. That's interesting. He's got drama from the get-go. One of the guys in the jail with him is a guy he put in there who's a gangster. So that's interesting. So how safe is he in prison? And then if I give him a murder to investigate, the thing about the murder is all the guards think it must be a con. All the cons think it must be a guard. Rebus is in the middle, and if he can't solve it, then the place is going to explode. I just thought, this is great. I've got to write it. I didn't really know how the murder happened or who did it. I just thought, there's a story to tell here. Let's get started.
So you've both written characters that have aged over time since you began the series. Some authors, they keep their protagonist at a certain age and keep them that age. How has this is for both of you, how have your characters changed from the start of writing Bosch and Rebus till now? Let's start with you, Michael.
Well, I seem to be like 2 books behind Ian. Whatever moves he makes, I'll make about 2 years later. So I guess I got to start researching prisons in California. I don't know. I mean, I look at the Bosch stuff and see definite pivots that kind of kept the series going. There has to be, you can't be static from book to book, but I think there has to be some significant pivots. And, one would be when he found out he was a father. Up until that point, he was kind of built himself to be bulletproof. No one could get to him. And then as soon as you have a kid, you can be gotten to, as we all know. And, and then another one was when he walked out and turned in his badge and he became a private eye for a while. And then another one is when he got invited back to be a cold case guy. So there's things that I, in my mind at least, say, okay, I can go about 3 or 4 more books in this direction, and then I'll need another pivot. And so you are always changing book to book, but then you look for big changes of courses. And I think that's one way of keeping a series going.
And Ian?
Yeah, I mean, Edinburgh is the main character in my books, as LA probably is the main character for Michael. Edinburgh keeps changing, and that fascinates me. I want to sort of show the changes that are happening in society. I want to show the changes that are happening in Scotland, the country that I live in, the UK, that we're part of, the wider world. And the crime novel allows me to do that with Rebus in retirement or with Rebus as a real guy. It was never meant as a younger guy who's an officer. It was never meant to be a series. I mean, book one was meant to be the only book. And then book two was written because nobody realized book one was meant to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde updated to the 80s. And then book three, I was living in London and hated it. So I thought, I bet Rebus would hate this place as well. I'll bring him to London. And by then, I'm three books in, and suddenly it's a series without it really intended to be so. But he just was a very useful character to me. And I'm still fascinated by him, as I think Michael is by Harry Bosch. I still haven't quite got to the core of what makes the guy tick. And every time I think I'm getting a handle on him, I'm getting to know him, he changes. You know, his health changes or his circumstances change. So he keeps surprising me. And I guess maybe that's part of it, is he keeps surprising me, and I like to hang out with him.
And the rest of these questions are both of you. So, how important is it to have an emotional core to a mystery for you, and how do you go about creating that? Again, I'll start with Michael on this one.
Well, I think it's important from the writing standpoint, but it's a character thing. I mean, Harry Bosch is an expert of making things personal, and so he'll get on a case and he'll almost subconsciously find a reason to get upset, or be troubled by the unfairness of what happened, or what somebody went through, and that becomes the trash can fire that he warms himself by, and that's really important for him as as this fictional character, but it's also important for the guy who's writing these stories. I want to be emotionally connected. A lot of them, almost all my stories, have some grain of starting point from a story a detective told me. So it's fictional, but it's usually inspired by a detective and telling me a story. So I feel the connection it had for them in their voices or the emotions, and that always grabs me and inspires me as a writer. And then I just transfer that to Harry. Harry gets the same anger, or gets the same you know shakes his head because this is just not fair, and this is not I'm not going to let this go by. And then if you get that, then you're really in good shape. You're off to the races.
In the end,
Yeah, same but different, I guess. I mean, I'm influenced by everything happening around me, everything that's in the newspapers. I will keep tearing news stories out, clipping news stories from newspapers and magazines. Things I hear on the radio or see on TV, I just jot them down, thinking that's really interesting. What does that say about us as a species or as a society that this stuff is happening? Or this stuff might be happening in London or America, but what if it happened in Edinburgh? What could I say about Edinburgh using that story? And people, sometimes I'll go into the bar and people will tell me a story, or people will write to me at the bar and leave me anecdotes and ideas, which is great. I do hang out with retired cops, not for research purposes, but sometimes along the way you get a great idea, or someone slips a little anecdote to you that's useful. I mean, if the antennae, as a writer, if the antennae are twitching, there are a multitude of stories out there waiting to be told, and the right one will find its way to you. I don't have to work too hard to find the next plot. The plot is out there looking for someone like me to pin it down, and put it on paper.
I want to shift now to the screen. You've both adapted work to the screen. How does the process of getting a book to screen, uh, how do you have the headspace to do that and also keep writing novels, or do you just put the novels aside while you're doing the screen work? Let's start with Michael again.
I think it looks more involved than it is. There's been some television shows made from my books, and I'm listed as a producer, but I'm not there day. So it's never, I've always said to anyone that wants me involved in a TV show that my books have to come first. Luckily in LA, things don't seem to get rolling in Hollywood till 10 or 11 and in the morning. And I'm a morning person. So I'm always writing by around 6 or 6:30 in the morning. And I've been able to, keep my pace of at least one book a year during all this TV stuff happening. I do pitch in and write scripts now and then, but normally it's when a showrunner comes to me and says, this one would be good for you. This is like, we want something right out of your books or whatever. And then I can do that. I don't think I'm a good screenwriter because I'm too steeped in the freedom that novels give you, freedom to go inside people's heads and say what they're thinking, how they're looking at the world. These are all things that don't go in scripts. So I haven't really tried to be really good as a script writer. I do it when needed. I hang out in the writing rooms from time to time. I rarely go to a set because I don't know anything about cameras and angles and all that kind of stuff. And it would mean nothing for me to say, hey, that was really good, to an actor who's been doing it for 35 years and it doesn't need a complete novice to tell you what they think. So it looks like I have my hands on all this stuff, but I really don't. I'm a book writer, and that's what I spend most of my time doing.
Ian?
Well, I've had a very patchy career compared to Michael as far as television and film go. Rebus has been done a few times on TV, most recently earlier this year on the BBC in the UK. It's not been shown in the US yet, I don't think. But again, I took a back seat. Although it says executive producer on the screen, I have so much power as executive producer that when they offered me a cameo, I went along and they forgot about me. So I sat around all day and then walked home. Phoned the screenwriter up and he said, "Oh, they just must have forgot you. We're there," and So that's how much power the executive producer has got on Rebus. And I leave the writing to people I trust, specifically in this incarnation, Gregory Burke, who's a fantastic dramatist and a screenwriter himself and showrunner. He's from the same background as me, same part of Scotland. He knows the themes I like writing about. He likes to write about those themes too. So it just happens, and I didn't even watch the rushes on this. I waited until it was going out in weekly installments on TV, and I watched it in weekly installments with my wife. I think we were possibly the only people on the planet who didn't binge it or watch 2 or 3 at one go. So now we're in the process of trying to get the funding for series 2. Trying to get funding for television in the UK is onerous and precarious. But season 1 seemed to do well, so fingers crossed we get a season 2, and I might even get a cameo next time. Who knows? The one thing I do have on the go at the moment, which I'm much more involved in, is a play. I did a stage play, which I was really happy with, called Rebus, a game called Malice, and it's Rebus at a dinner party, and murder erupts. And I've gone to see it more than half a dozen times. It's on tour in the UK, and occasionally I'll do a Q&A on stage with the actors. I'm going to go down to York in a few days to do the same thing again. And that's been great fun, hanging out with the actors there and watching them come up with all the good lines and me taking the credit has been fantastic.
Yeah, there's
So
something.
do you guys go ahead, Michael?
I'm just going to say that, like I said, it looks like I'm more involved than I am, but I do get all the credit. So, and there's lots of fantastic ad-libbing and scripted lines that are not mine, but it all funnels back to me in the long run. So I kind of feel like a little bit of a thief at times. But that's how TV is.
So do you guys lean into the adage that a novelist should not adapt their own work, or do you think that a novelist should make those attempts? And how do you avoid the pitfalls of holding on too tight to ideas that don't translate to the screen?
Well, I'm going to say what Ian said is something really important there. He trusts the people who are adapting his work. And if you can find that, which I have, that's half the battle, to tell you the truth. So in my shows, I've been very much involved in the writing room in the first year or so, and then once I realized that these people know what they're doing and they know how to do it much better than me, because I'm stuck with like what Harry Bosch is thinking at all times. You let it go, and the idea that someone should not adapt their own books, I don't think that's fully true. But I think you should at least watch out for your books if you're allowed to do that. And oftentimes writers don't. But in this new kind of streaming world, it seems like they're much more welcome than maybe even 10 years ago. I mean, I had 2 movies made where they more or less just patted me on the head and said, "You run along, and we'll go write a book or something, and we'll take care of this." That it was not like that with TV. In fact, initially Amazon said they weren't going to make Bosch unless I was involved in it in some way and watching over it, and that was like the shot heard around the world. That had just never been said to me before, and so I think things are changing. And writers, the book writers, the originators, are more important, but they also should probably know their limitations, which I feel like I know mine.
And Ian, do you lean into the adage that a novel should not?
Yeah. I know some novelists who are very good at adapting their own work. Anthony Horowitz would be one of them that springs immediately to mind. Others want to let go. Some novelists are good at adapting other people's work. They're just good at writing for the screen. I don't think I am necessarily very good at writing for the screen. I'm not very good at writing collegiately. I'm not good at working as part of a big team and taking orders from people. The thing about the novelist is the novelist gets to play God. By the time we hand it over to the publisher, it's in really good shape, and very few people are going to change it radically. As a screenwriter, you're very low down the pecking order. Even if you're a big name, you're fairly low down the pecking order. And lots of people are going to come and go, and they all want you to change it, or they want to change it. And it's maybe less like the ideal that you had in your mind when you started the work is often what doesn't end up on the screen. Whereas with a novel, when I start with an ideal of what it could possibly be, the novel will be fairly close to that. It won't be that, but it'll be closer to it than the screen adaptation would be.
I was talking to Dennis Lehane once, and he said, as a novelist, I'm God. As a screenwriter, I'm more like God's tailor.
Well, since we're mentioning Dennis, I think he was a writer on The Wire, which was a fantastic TV show. And there was one episode where I forget his name, but a kind of revered detective died, and they put his body on a pool table in the bar, and someone gave a toast. And I thought that the toast that he gave to what it's like to be a detective was the best thing ever written about detectives. And when I saw Dennis, I said, that was fantastic. That was the best thing ever written about what it takes to be a good detective. And he said, thanks, I didn't write it. But his name was on the script, because everything it's all moved together, and scenes get moved from one episode to another. It's coming to that world from a room where you're by yourself and you're God, as Dennis and Ian have said, and come into this world where it's really hard to track what is happening, and who's writing what, and how things get chopped up and moved around and so forth. It's interesting, but not a world that I feel very good about or welcome
to. Next question is, what is your favorite novel? And you can't mention each other.
One favorite novel?
Just one favorite novel. I know it's hard to take it down to just one, but
well, I'll tell you one that really influenced me as a writer, and that was Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. Came out right when I was writing my first novel, and it was like a Bible to have next to me.
Ian?
Well, possibly for similar reasons, maybe I'll go with Laidlaw by William McIlvanney. Just when I was starting to think about writing about a guy called John Rebus, a literary novelist, a Scottish literary novelist called William McIlvanney, who had won literary prizes, wrote 3 crime novels with a Glasgow detective called Laidlaw. And they were gritty, they were very American in their style. And I just thought, oh, you can write crime fiction about contemporary Scotland. Interesting. And it won't be genre fiction. It will be literary. It will be on the literature shelves in the bookstores. So he kind of made it okay for me to write crime fiction because I was doing I was going to be a professor of English literature. I was studying a PhD in the Scottish novel. I didn't read much crime fiction of any at that time in my early 20s. And then along came William McIlvanney, and he changed everything for me.
And Ian, what was the catalyst that led you to want to be a writer of mysteries in particular?
I don't know, man. What was it? I mean, I was doing a PhD on the novels of Muriel Spark, who wrote The Primal of Miss Jean Brodie. Some people will know the movie starring Maggie Smith. And she took me down a kind of rabbit hole because Miss Jean Brodie is descended from a real guy called William Brodie, who was a gentleman by day and a thief by night. And he was a carpenter, and he was eventually hanged on a scaffold that he had made himself. And in Robert Louis Stevenson's childhood bedroom was a wardrobe made by this guy, William Brodie. And Stevenson's nursemaid would tell him the story of this guy who was both good and evil contained in the same person. So that takes us straight to Jekyll and Hyde. So Spark takes me to Miss Jean Brodie. Miss Jean Brodie takes me to William Brodie, who takes me to Jekyll and Hyde. I thought this kind of gothic, this dark matter is there in all Scottish literature, and I was seeing it everywhere. And I just wanted to update those themes and bring that darkness to contemporary Edinburgh, the Edinburgh of the late 1980s or the mid 1980s. And that's what I thought I was doing with Noughts and Crosses, the first Rebus book. And in that book, you are meant to think that this guy Rebus, who has a locked room in his apartment that we never go into, and who has blackouts and who attacks people during these blackouts, that he may actually be the killer. In other words, he may well be Jekyll and Hyde. And that was it. He just was a fascinating character. And having done that, I just thought I want to spend more time with this guy. And he also, a cop is a detective is a very useful way of looking at society because he's got a backstage path. He's got an all areas path to the highest, from the highest in the land to the lowest in the land. He can move between these different strata of society with great ease. So I just thought, yeah, this is my guy. He's going to be my tool.
Okay, I have some process questions, but I'm going to put those aside for the moment because I have some audience questions that I'm going to get to. Make sure I get those done. From Michael, Karen asks, did your reporting career overlap with your writing career?
Yeah. I wrote basically 4 books while I was still a reporter. The fourth one, I took a leave of absence because I wanted to see what I could do without having to, I was writing all the time. I was writing my books at night, but during the day I'm writing crime stories. And I just wanted to see if my writing of fiction would improve if it was my full-time focus. So for my 4th book, I wrote for 6 months. I took a 6-month leave of absence from the newspaper and wrote most of that book. And I saw that I had to do this. I had to quit my job, and because I thought my writing improved so much. And so, but I didn't want to leave them high and dry. That they really said, "Look, we'll give you the 6 months off, but don't in 6 months don't say you're not coming back because we will have lost our time trying to replace you." So I did go back for about 6 more months. Told them, take your time. I mean, get the right person, but I'm going to leave in 6 months. So you have 6 months to find my replacement. And it's funny, they found a good replacement for me, and like a month later was the O.J. Simpson thing. And I saw the guy who took my place in this giant throng of journalists outside of O.J.'s house, and I was at home being a full-time novelist by then, and it was like, boy, I made the right choice.
For Ian, Kelly asks, should a reader start with book 1?
You can start with book 1. I don't think it's the best book, but it sets the scene. I was very young and naive when I wrote it. It's overwritten. You can start at book 1. You can jump in pretty much almost anywhere. You could start with the retirement books, the later Rebus if you want, which is Standing in Another Man's Grave. You could start with the short stories, see if you like the character. The latest one reads to me like a standalone. You don't need too much backstory. I'm always conscious of that with a series. I'm sure Michael's the same. You know, how much backstory do you need to give without boring your regular readers? And that's something we'll have to come to terms with, is how much we need to give. And you know, I think I've got fairly good at that down the years of knowing, you know, how to sort of fill in the backstory for the new reader without boring the true hardcore fans. So yeah, start anywhere, and if you enjoy them, keep going.
And this next question is for both of you. It's a good question from Lori. You've both created kind of female successor detective characters. Will they at some point take over as your main character that you'll be writing about?
Well, for me, I guess yes, because you know, like Rebus, Harry ages in real time, so realistically, he doesn't have a lot of time left. So you know, so he's been mostly in a mentoring role in the last few books, and he's mentoring Ballard and his own daughter. And I don't know, that's where my interest lies at the moment. So I think they're the successors. Maybe as you mature as a writer, you feel more confident writing about the opposite gender. I feel pretty good about it, and I like exploring that. I think, especially in law enforcement, women have a much harder time, you know, moving forward, going around blockades and so forth. It's a tougher thing, and so therefore, I'm not saying I'm sympathetic to it. I mean, I am sympathetic to it, but that's not the reason I write about women. I think it's because, you know, you win or lose in these books with how your characters meet challenges of every level, and they're tougher challenges for women. So I'm giving myself a tougher challenge in that way.
In the end,
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, I didn't feel confident writing from a woman's perspective. Not many strong women characters in the books, but then I introduced Siobhan Clarke as Rebus's colleague, and women crime writers and women cops said they liked her as a character, so I became a little bit more confident. And I noticed looking around me at the real life police that it was no longer a boys' club anymore. That although it had been slow, the glass ceiling was breaking, and women were making the grade. Of course, sexism is still an issue, but there are certainly more women in higher positions in the police than ever before, and more women police officers in visible roles than ever before. So all of that is good, and it made me feel a little bit more confident about writing about women. And yeah, could Siobhan Clarke take over? I would love to have. At many points in the last decade or so, I've wanted to write a Siobhan Clarke novel, but I've just not quite found the story that feels like it's her story, that feels like she's the character best placed to tell it. So that might come along as yet. And yeah, Rebus, as with Harry, has health issues, aging issues. He's got inbuilt decrepitude. And so who knows what's going to happen in the next few years. The only caveat I would add to that, Michael, is that great characters never die. The creators shuffle off this mortal coil, but we're getting Endeavour Morse books. We're getting books about Inspector Morse long after the creator passed away. We're getting Sherlock Holmes books. We get Poirot books. We get Miss Marple books. We've just got a new Le Carre book, a book about George Smiley, his most famous character, written by Le Carre's son. So although you and I may not be writing these books in the future, someone else could be.
True. That's true.
okay, we have a question from one of our audience. It's a process question. How did you find your publishers when you were just starting out?
Well, it's a different world. You know, there was no internet. There's no email. So it was groping around in the dark for the most part. It probably still is, but it was like this long process of, yeah, I mean, I was smart enough, or I had read enough to know I should probably get an agent first. to this day, I think I only know one writer who sent a manuscript to a publisher, they call them a transom book, and it got published. Almost everyone else I know had agents, so I went down the agent path, and it took forever because you're literally sending, through the mail, giant, thick manuscripts when you get one who want to read. It's so different now. Now everything is faster. So I just did it the old-fashioned way, which I'm sure Ian had to do too.
Well, yeah, you're looking at author number 2, Michael. I didn't have an agent for the first book. Yeah, my first novel was not a rebus novel. My first novel was called The Flood and was meant to be literary fiction and was published by a very small press in Scotland. But because that book was published, an agent came calling and said, you working on anything else? And I said, yeah, I've got this book about a detective in Edinburgh called Rebus. And so she went off and took it around publishers in London, and the first 6 turned it down, and number 7 said okay. So that was it. It was taken by a London publisher. But as you've said, the situation has changed so much now. There was no online publishing. You couldn't self-publish online the way you can now. You were dealing with traditional publishers, meetings in smoky rooms, sending manuscripts off in the mail on a hope and a prayer. I got a book called the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which listed every publisher in the UK and every agent in the UK. And I'd go through that and just send stuff off to them. And that's how I got my agent. Not my first agent. She disappeared in mysterious circumstances. Then I had to look for a second agent, and I just went to the Writers and Artists Yearbook. And the funkiest looking name I saw was Curtis Brown. I thought it's kind of half Curtis Mayfield, it's half James Brown. So I ended up with the oldest, fogiest literary agency in London.
This would probably be our last question. It's from Hugo. It's directed to Michael, but I'm going to open up to both of you. The question is, how do you write stories set in such a politically divided society? Your writing is very authentic and contemporary and set in the present. So how do you deal with the divides of the political societal worlds that you're writing about?
Well, it's a great challenge. I mean, it's a positive thing. It's not positive for our real society, but in a book, it gives you, stuff that you can churn through, that you can write about. So it's an attractive thing. It's an opportunity, not a problem. I think you just got to, your character will have an opinion or a point of view, and you just want to make sure you're not telling people how to think. You don't want to be didactic, but you can't really write realistically about contemporary crime or society without getting into the divisiveness of society. If you're going to be accurate, you got to include all that stuff, and it's an opportunity. You can create stories that like show aspects of that. I remember I wrote a book that was pretty much a few years ago, took place in a week, and it happened to be the week of January 6th, the attack on the U.S. Capitol. And so that's in that book. I think my characters are as stunned as most people were at what happened there. I don't think they're didactic about it at all. And again, it's about opportunity. I have a book coming out tomorrow that has aspects of what's going on in our country, USA country. And I think it was just an opportunity to use it in a book.
Indian?
Yeah, I mean, I think many writers of our generation and the generation that's come after us came to the crime novel because they saw it as a good way of exploring these big questions of moral responsibility, of politics, of society, the mess that we're in. How did we get in this mess? How can we potentially get out of this mess? Do we get the kind of crimes that our society deserves? Do we get the kind of cops investigating them that our society needs? All of these things are contained in the novels we write, and the books I write do reflect what's happening in the politics and the society around me. Sometimes the problem with that is they can age quite quickly. So, I mean, I set a book during the G8 conference when it came to Scotland several years ago. And there were riots on the streets of Edinburgh. It was a very exciting time to be in the city, and I used all of that. But then towards the end of that week, there was a bomb explosion in London, 7/7. And so Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister at the time, had to scurry back to London. So I couldn't write the book and not have that be in it, although it could not be germane to the plot I was writing about. So, you know, I mean, hopefully I think we think we're writing books that will last through the ages. And the more contemporary stuff we put in, I think the less likely they are to last the ages because they become period pieces very quickly. So I do, you know, some of that's in the background. Like COVID was bubbling away in the background when I was writing, setting books in that period. But mostly I aim for the universal. Let's put it that way. Whether I get it or not, I don't know, but I aim for the universal.
Okay. Before we end, Michael, you want to talk about when The Waiting is going to be released and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's released tomorrow. So very timely here. Yeah, I'm in New York. I'm going to start a book tour starting tomorrow, and it brings together Harry Bosch. It's billed as a Ballard and Bosch novel, so it's Renee Ballard, but then it becomes Witch Bosch because Maddie Bosch plays a pretty strong part in it as well, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's a little bit of a passing of a baton type story, and we see Maddie come into her own as a kind of a nascent investigator, and that was the exciting part about it for me.
And Ian, talk about Midnight in Blue.
Yeah, Midnight in Blue. Rebus in prison trying to solve a locked cell mystery. On the outside, his one-time colleagues are investigating a missing person. A teenage girl has gone AWOL, and of course that's had a huge ripple effect on the community around her. And the inside world of the prison and the outside world of Edinburgh start to sort of melt and come together in interesting ways. It wasn't an easy book to write for all kinds of reasons. Quite claustrophobic in places. And at the start of the book, I had no idea if Rebus would survive or not. But that's always been part of the fun for me, is never knowing if my guy will make it to the end or not.
Well, we've reached our time. I want to thank both our authors, Michael Connelly and Rankin, for coming to talk to us. I want to thank the audience for asking their questions and joining us this morning. It's been a great pleasure. I suppose that's all there is to say. Thank you again, and good luck with the book tours.
Alan,
Thanks very much.